Hello and welcome to Rule of Carnage with me, Mike, and him, Glenn. We're here talking about designing better miniature games. And we are in this episode in the middle of a conversation about designing one of my miniature games more better. So we're talking about a game called Hobgoblin, which is a mass fantasy battle rule set that I wrote and in fact last opened the Word document for back in 2015. So I was writing it in 2014, 2015. I've been playing some Warhammer recently, and the experience of that got me to thinking about the reasons that I started work on Hobgoblin, my own mass battle game, all those many moons ago. And I think to kick off this conversation, actually, I want to just look at something which has changed in the world of Warhammer since I last was writing Hobgoblin, and which has asked a couple of questions about the ever so troubling movement system, which is that I now have my old Warhammer miniatures, like these classic metal horrors. I have them mounted on little circular bases. So the game of Hobgoblin, as I wrote it, was it made the assumption, nay, built from the foundations up, that all units were little squares or oblongs, and that those units remained exactly the same size during the game, and they didn't remove models, they just took wounds, and all this seemed very revolutionary. And then I read Kings of War and realized that other people had done the same thing. Even the character models were just buried inside units. They were little upgrades on units. Monsters were again just units that flew around with 10 wounds. And now that I've got all these models on circular bases, there's a question. One is, do I just ignore that fact and get a piece of cardboard cereal box and pop them all on a little movement tray, or even buy one of those very beautiful MDF circles cut into a square doodad for a movement tray, which is perfectly reasonable? Or do I say, there's a difference between regiments and skirmishing units, and why not have something that is classic from early Warhammers, which is there are some skirmishing units and some regiment units, and perhaps regiment units get some, they're better, they're poorer at moving, they're more annoying at moving, but they get some bonuses, which is when they're charging or being charged, they're a bit better and more sturdy than a skirmishing unit. So yeah, that's kind of where I started thinking.
I mean, I have horrible memories of Skirmish Hammer back in, what was it, 6th edition, where the Wood Elf taxi service dominated the tournament scene, and I just really painful games of having these skirmishers smash through all of your ranked up units, and then going to tournaments where nobody had ranked up units. And I mean, it's not, I mean, I'll tell you, I mean, this is one of the things. I'm not that bothered about particularly the look of a tabletop personally, but I totally get the perspective that GW came to at one point, which was saying, it's really lovely seeing ranked up block. There's something very lovely about two sides of ranked up block units on the table. And Fantasy Battle is meant to be about ranked up block units. And it got to this point where you didn't see a single unit of more than, front rank and second rank at an entire GT. And they say, and clearly they were like, okay, something's gone awry here with our ranked up block unit system. And I honestly think it's pretty tough to create a game where skirmishers and block units coexist peacefully, as it were, where one of them doesn't end up sort of dominating over the other one.
Well, one interesting line of attack on this would be, so I'm trying to think, is that so there's a few moments in earlier games designs where you take a radical sidestep to see whether something unintuitive actually ends up working much more intuitively. So for example, I'm thinking what if ranked up units were mostly the thing, and you could have units in skirmish formation, but they sort of they're basically invisible. They like they don't stop ranked units, and if ranked units move over them, they basically just get like they lose wounds or they get deleted or something. So somewhere in the sort of, they give you a new set of options, but they're in no way the sort of tricksy power play that they ended up being, like snaking things out is. Because the problem is that, like, snaking things out where you pull a set of models to a point where you end up with a bunch of measurement opportunities, places to measure from.
I mean, in Warhammer, it was basically the case of, okay, you had war machines, and then someone stuck their war machines on a hill and then lined up a bunch of block units in front of them, and you couldn't get through the block units fast enough, and the war machines just obliterated you, and that was an overly powerful army. So at first you had flying high, and then eventually you had skirmishers, like 5 dudes who couldn't hurt a fly, but what they could do is they could run up and stab to death 3 guys on a cannon because they were all squishy as can be. And then somebody somewhere went, why not have these skirmisher dudes able to take on an actual unit?
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as they built a unit of skirmishers that could take on an actual unit in any way, shape, or form, that there was a bit of a collapse that happened there, because, well, okay, so these guys got 360-degree line of sight and the other guys don't. So just run up next to you and go, you can't see me, and then obliterate you. And then you had it sort of, the meta kind of exploded there in Warhammer. And I think the thing of it is that when skirmishers were a tool for dealing with a very specific issue, which made total sense. It makes total sense you should have a cannon in your faux medieval fantasy world, and it makes total sense that someone's going to go, you and you, the guys who aren't all covered in armor, peg it up the battlefield and stab up that bloke behind the cannon, because he's only wearing his trousers, and you can just shiv him and then be on your way. And there's the thing, and when skirmishers did run up, shiv the cannon, then go, well, we've got very little to do now, we'll just shuffle off into the corner of the battlefield and have a fag or whatever,
that was that 40 victory points.
Yeah, that was totally fine with skirmishers. Everyone understood what they did. If you rolled up and the other person didn't happen to have war machines, they speed bumped somebody with their feeble little lives, and that was great. And then it was, as soon as you went, okay, let's make these guys in any way competitive with a proper serious ranked up unit, where they didn't just run into the side of it and then boing off and go, well,
all right, well, I think that's a point well made then. So broadly speaking, with some minor exceptions, skirmishers have to suck, because their flexibility will cause them to dominate if they don't suck.
I mean,
but their flexibility is the reason that you would take them as a combined arm.
I think they have to, in my opinion, and it's just an opinion, I think they have to have very specific jobs on the battlefield. If they have a really specific job, and in relation to this being a game with a rock, paper, scissors motif, if a skirmisher has one job and it's great at that job and garbage at all the other jobs, and skirmishers are great because they're like, they're ninjaing around and pegging up and down the battlefield, and the other guys go, oh no, the skirmishers are coming, they're going to do the job that they're really good at, and I don't want them to do that.
There's a unit called light cavalry in the rules at the moment, which is alongside war beasts is the fastest, most flexible movement unit, and is also like, it's crummy against most things. So it's 5s against infantry and 5s against foot knights, but it's 2-ups against war machines, and that's its one strength. So essentially, light cavalry is sort of providing that already. So then I think the other thing before we get too far down on that is so I still have a bunch of models on square bases, but as part of this sort of flirtation with recent Warhammer, and because I've been making skirmish games that have been using my fantasy models, I've been gently converting a fair number of my models over to circular bases. And so if this game 6 years ago was about taking your existing Warhammer armies and playing it in a different way, same overall feeling of the actual tabletop experience, different army building experience, and very different, like, you know, you can get different models out, then I think there's a fairly reasonable question to ask, which is, why make this a regiment game if many of the people who would have the models to play this game are now, you know, rocking Warhammer 40,000 style Age of Sigmar armies with everything on circular bases? Because that sort of suggests that the right way to pitch this game and it actually land is to say, whatever your current Warhammer armies are, PS anything that you had previously as well, you pick this game up and use them in a completely different way and explore the models that you have bought and painted and turn out to be garbage. So I think that's something that I'm worrying about, is because it breaks a few, it doesn't break a lot of things, but it breaks a few like core assumptions of the mechanics, if not everything is just little cardboard squares.
I mean, the thing is that the question about regiment units that's interesting is a question that we were talking about in the previous conversation, is a question about momentum movement as opposed to point-to-point movement, and a question about flanks and rears and being engaged in a grinding combat and then popped in the rear. And if that's a fun question, if the question of, do I engage knowing that there's a possibility that I'll get popped in the flank by this other unit, can I punch through fast enough, etc., etc. If that's an interesting, fun question, then you want some regimented units, because that's the only way you can have proper flanks without it all going wibbly wobbly and pear shaped in places.
Yeah,
and then the only question there,
oblongs around skirmishing round bases.
And the question there is about, okay, well, if how big my flank is a disadvantage, then how big my model's bases becomes relevant. You know, if it's like, oh, if my flank is long enough, you can hit me with 2 units in my flank, therefore I want the smallest, squarest, most efficient bases to pop along. But if the point of the game is, I don't care whether you've got 2 models or 10 models in your unit, as long as your unit has 10 wounds and etc., then fundamentally what you're saying is, get a footprint of your unit and then stack as many models onto that footprint as you like. And I don't give a single, you know, whether they're on round bases or octagonal bases or whatever. That's the footprint of the unit, because that's a fair flank and a fair rear, and that's the rear and flank that we're going to operate on. And then decorate your unit footprint however you want. Have just one big monolith.
That's the way that Kings of War tends to deal with it, I think, if I'm not wrong. But I suppose one of the things that's interesting about this game is, if you ask, like, I'm not certain I want to ask people to do some specific hobby for this. I want this to be an accessible thing that means you don't have to break any of your existing models in order to play this. So that, I think, is probably, that's actually a core tenet, which is playable with the models that you have without modification. But, like, you know, playing on squares of cardboard with but then it's an aesthetic problem, which I wouldn't play in that way.
I mean, there is going to be a mathematical solution there to say, okay, the round bases are at this diameter and the square bases are that diameter, and there's going to be a calculation to go, okay, well, you either have 3 round bases all touching each other, or 4 square bases, unless you're square base. There will be a mathematical formula you can punch it into to go, okay, if these are your bases, this is the number of models you get to a unit. And if this is your basis, this is the number of models you get to a unit. And the number of models in the unit don't matter damn to anybody. It's the footprint that they combine to. And here's a handy little table that says, well, if this is your miniatures base.
And in the rules right now, it says per unit type, what's the minimum and maximum frontage and what's the minimum and maximum depth. And right now, that's very permissive to sort of fit the wide variety of shapes of Warhammer units that there were 5 years ago. But it would equally be possible just to say, do you know what, there's actually quite a limited, like, everything is like between 18 and 23 wide. So, you know, you might get, you know, 4 massive bases or 5 smaller ones or 6, but like it's always sort of 18 to 21 centimeters and like be quite rigid, and so most units will look about the same size.
I mean, the thing
a
is,
certain type will be a certain shape, maybe.
yeah, I mean, the thing is, you're saying about sort of there's an aesthetic question to asking people to put things onto a bit of cardboard to move them around the table. The thing is, if you ask people to rank up 9 round-based models and always move them in a square formation, and
No,
it's
that's
gonna be 5 minutes.
that's exactly the aesthetic problem I'm reacting to. That's why I think the question I have to ask myself the question, which is, if this isn't a regimental movement game, am I still excited about it? Is there a way to make it into something that has freer movement that still functions in the way that Hobgoblin is trying to function? I don't know the answer to that yet.
I mean, because because if it's not a regimental unit game, you don't have flanks, you don't have rears, you don't have the same form of movement system. You don't have that sort of
Yes,
line up.
a lot of things would change, but maybe not everything.
I mean, I guess the question there is, why have you got units at all? Ultimately, if what you've got is a model, or a thing which can be represented by whatever you feel like, and it doesn't have flanks and it doesn't have a rear, and it doesn't have 90-degree line of sight and unit movement, and it's got 10 wounds and the wounds connect. It's like, what? You haven't got units game, have you? You've got models. Everyone's got a model with 10 wounds and 10 attacks, and they move that model around.
No. I mean, you haven't got a regiment game with flank. You haven't got a flank and ranks game, but you might have a unit game where units have to stay within certain coherence, and where units are and how many there are in an area all matters, and it becomes about pressure and board control. Like there's no reason why a unit has to be a square. It can still be a unit, but it's an amorphous blob. I think the problem is that non-regimental blobs ended up getting into long lines, and that's always been an issue. And there's probably a way of writing that which doesn't totally become trigonometry, which is they have to be at least two models within that line, so at least they have to be a little wiggly sort of 2 rank line or something.
I mean, genuinely, and I'd like to see where you go with it. If you do go that way, what happens is, I personally think that most unit skirmish games are not particularly about bringing pressure to certain. They are by and large about powering up a unit and piling it into another unit and then slaughtering that unit and then doing it again, and just picking the right targets and powering up the right units. I honestly don't think I've really seen one that's really about bringing pressure to bear with units in an interesting way in that respect. And I think, to be honest, it feels like to me most of the games that have done that interestingly have just dispensed with the units. They've just gone, Malifaux's just gone, okay, it's about you bringing pressure to bear with your auras, and Infinity, it's about you bringing pressure to bear with your line of sight. It's not about, I'm not sure how you bring pressure to bear interestingly with the unit. And I'm not sure, I don't know. Because it feels like Warhammer doesn't particularly bring pressure to bear with its units. You have threat ranges from your weaponry, and you pile in with but it's not really about building a flow and a pressure system within the battlefield. It's not about going, okay, this is the flow of the battle and this is where I'm going through. It is basically about going, he can kill him, so he'll go kill him. He can kill him, so he'll go kill him. I need to prioritize him and not him, and so on and so forth.
I mean, one obvious way to explore, one obvious direction to explore would be whatever the sort of Dark Ages equivalent of Overwatch is. So there being a sort of reaction bubble around a unit where if you come too close, I essentially get a free advance or a free charge or some kind of reaction, so that the order of play and the position of units, and because I think that and then potentially that's you could have units that react multiple times, but maybe there's a sort of Saga-esque fatigue mechanic, or that by reacting in one direction, I'm leaving board control from somewhere else. So that probably be the first place I'd go.
So you come within a certain range and I can attack you, and I'm
No,
more powerful if I've got. I know. I'm just saying is this pacifier in Mother's Wing?
Yeah. No, it's like a passive fire thing. I mean, that's the obvious place to go with a unit.
Yeah, sorry. If this is pacifier, and if combined arms is Mother's Wing, are we tracking back to doing A Billion Suns in a fantasy
Don't worry,
world?
I was already thinking, do all of your units turn up via gates, and is this a multi?
They just get summoned out of gates out of the ground.
But then but genuinely at that point I was like, that's a bit too Age of Sigmar, so I'm not going to go there.
And the thing is,
they didn't lean into the realm gates as much as I was expecting. Like when Age of Sigmar came out and there were these enormous fiery portals, I was like, oh my goodness, the whole game's about teleporting around like Portal, the video game. That's so cool. But
the thing is, and this is genuinely an interesting point, because
unlike the rest of the conversation.
No, sorry, but part of your inspiration here is going, okay, it is interesting because I've solved some of these problems in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a point where if you solve those problems in the same way that you solved them in the other game, and you make this game into that, into a Billions, there's a reason that Billion Suns isn't Gaslands in space.
Yeah, exactly. And so I mean, I'm sort of wisecracking about some of the things that I would steal from, but there are like general mechanical problems that I'm like, well, I know a better way to do that. But the fact remains that like this game needs to be about what this game is about, and it can't collect a bunch of other functioning mechanics from other games, because those games are about different things, and the alchemy of those things will not add up to summoning the flavor that I'm looking for. And I think that I'm at that interesting stage in a game design where, this would probably be the moment in a game's design where I'd be like suffering a crisis of confidence and trying to figure out, wait a minute, what is the actual unarguable heart of this game that I need to preserve and fight for, and what is everything that is currently not serving that and it needs to get thrown out. And I think that's kind of like, it's fun having just like fast forwarded to that moment, because I really did all the hard work of getting something like standing on its own two legs, and it's a perfectly functioning game. Like there's nothing wrong with it. I've played it with a bunch of people and it's fun. It's not like, it's like now I'm asking, well, what is the what's the unarguable core, and that everything needs to point towards. I think you've
and that's the thing, I guess,
questions about like, is it is there any sort of combined arms thing, like is there any kind of pressure, or do things have specific jobs?
I mean, I know maybe it's because it's just an easy way out, but if it's a game about regiments, then it's definitely going to have to answer different problems and be different things from A Billion Suns and Gaslands, because they're not. They obviously couldn't give a hoot about flanks and rears and things like that. And I suppose the question would be, is if it's not a regiments game, what questions are you looking to answer? Do you know what I mean? That you haven't already answered in the other games that you've designed. That's what I would want. That's what would drive me to do it. It'd be like, okay, what's going to be interesting about this? It's like I say, it's where I'd be curious to see how a proper combined arms game would genuinely work. And that's where you're looking at all sorts of things like pinning and again, if you're not going to have a psychology system, it might be that having a more sophisticated and interesting psychology system might be one of the answers, because the point of a creeping barrage is not to blow the other guys to pieces. It's to make sure their heads are down when your infantry charge into their trench. The point of a combined arms thing is not necessarily to kill the guy with the missile fire. It's to make the guy, unable to defend himself when the people who is going to kill him turn up.
So that would be represented potentially by like units can have a number of states that they're currently in, and depending on what you do to them or what they get done to, what they're able to do for themselves, they can sort of change state either up and down a linear chart or to just different, essentially like a bit like the behaviors in Perilous Tales.
Because that starts become, I think that starts to become a sort of interesting question. We go, okay, here's a unit of archers. If they don't fire their arrows are okay, but they're pretty weak. If they don't fire their arrows and they go into a medieval Overwatch, and then whatever, a unit of their cavalry charges somebody within their arrow arc, well, then they can spend their Overwatch in order to get the people that the cavalry are charging disrupted by pouring some arrows onto them, and then the cavalry completely obliterate the people they're hitting rather than hit them and then bog into them and then get ground down. And then it's a question of, oh, okay, they've got some archers over there on medieval Overwatch. That means that their cavalry are super nasty. Ooh, let's not go within range of the cavalry, or let's make sure if the cavalry do charge us, they're outside of range of the archers, because then we can bog the cavalry down. And, once the cavalry run out of their steam on their charge, they're just going to get, pulled down and bogged down. It's funny because I have a very, very complex sort of medieval fantasy warfare game sitting in a corner somewhere, which is a sort of, okay, you can have it, you can do, because the thing that I always loved is when you read like an old battle and they say, okay, this one dude put his guys up on this cliff there and he thought, oh, I'm totally invincible, I've got my long guns up on the cliff, I'm going to obliterate the other guy. And the other person got these guys and fitted them out with like rock climbing gear and trained them up, and then they climbed up the thing and they slaughtered the cannons, and it was a total massacre in the other direction. And it's like, well, with a normal army list game, you can't go, well, I'm going to always turn up with my rock climbers because there's no cliff today, it's complete garbage. And so I did write a thing which was very, okay, you turn up to the table and then you buy certain terrain, and then the other person buys certain things to react to the terrain, and you go backwards and forwards until you've got a very, very unique, weird, sort of crunchy, genuine to a sort of battle that happened, which is completely asymmetrical sides, because you spudged all of your money on the terrain, and then they've held back and gone, okay, well, yeah, I bought a rock climber, so you put all your money onto cliffs and put your guys up a cliff, and I bought a rock climber, and so I'm just going to cut your throats. And that was very much sort of, okay, we need to have combined arms because that's what actually happens, and we need to have terrain where you can go, I'm going to buy a hollow so that when my cavalry go through the hollow, they go invisible to you, because you're on a hill, as happens in real battles. And I'm going to,
to sort of combat the fact that there's a bunch of sort of things that have happened in history which are exciting and fun, but they require you to have a sort of overly complicated terrain setup that when we were kids, we sort of started messing about with rivers and castles and stuff. And then as we got more and more familiar with these rank and flank games, we just went, let's just put a couple of hills and concentrate on the shooting each other.
Yeah, there's only like 3 sorts of terrain in these sorts of games. There's grassland, hills, trees. And if you're really fancy, there's a river. There's a river that no one goes within a mile of ever. The river usually winds one corner, winds immediately off the next corner, and no one goes anywhere near it. And it's just a case, you constantly read about generals who picking the terrain for the battlefield is the most important thing of the whole thing, and bringing somebody to bear on the right battlefield was, won or lost the combat, and then everyone turns up.
I mean, it should even be in a skirmish game. Like there's some moment in a Conan story where he like leads a bunch of people like up a cliff and round, and they kind of dive down onto it. And it's got not a very large scale battle, but it's like, yeah, like it's very much missing from most.
No, totally. Yeah, terrain is everything in sort of these sorts of battles when they actually happened, and every one of these battles on the tabletop takes place on a valley with 2 hills and 2 forests. All of them. Every general goes, I shall bring him to bay between the 2 hills and next to the forest. Yeah. That is where all of my battles are fought. Look upon my hill. It's next to a forest.
And oddly, there isn't even uneven ground because of the number of skulls and corpses, because every battle takes place in. Yeah.
Eventually, there are no hills because it's just filled in with the mulch of
exactly
of crushed units. Yeah, and that anyway, just to say, that was my own sort of run off on having a run at one of these. But yeah, and I think it's one of the things where the interesting questions maybe to answer are, why don't some of the tabletop battles work the way that real battles work? Because they don't. I mean, they don't even, and so many of them don't even work like movie versions of the battles. It's a number of times you watch whatever, you watch Braveheart, and then no Warhammer battle has ever done any of the things that the dramatic and exciting moments in Braveheart. And it's like, okay, Braveheart isn't a good or historically accurate film, but it's got some exciting moments in it, and tabletop games are meant to be fun and exciting. Why not recreate some of those moments? Why not have somebody run up and pick up a banner and stabilize the line? And that was jolly hockey sticks fun. Anyway, yes, I mean, I think there's an important question to figure out, as I say, as to what the questions that Hobgoblin 2.0 are actually trying to answer, and what exactly about it excites you.
And I think that, like, what I need to do is I need to sort of, I'm at the stage now, which I get to quite often, where I need to get some forces out on the table, and I need to push them around, making like humming noises and sort of umming and ahhing about what it's supposed to feel like. Because I think, as we've been talking, I think one of the things, like, Advanced Wars is definitely one of the inspirations, and one of the things about Advanced Wars and the pressure thing that we were talking about is that Advanced Wars is a hex-based, a square-based system, and pieces can move different rates over different terrains. And so knowing exactly where someone can strike with their different units is very much like, you end up sitting like 1 square away from how far their howitzer can get to you, and sort of playing a little cat and mouse. But you can do that with a video game where a turn-based strategy game might have 30 turns in it, because it's fast to play and it's a video game, but you can't necessarily get away with that on the tabletop. But the other thing that's sort of along that lines is that, actually, one of the things I'm remembering is that, like many of us, like I was sort of obsessed with those maps that you got in White Dwarf battle reports in the 90s, which are the same as those maps that you get when you're, getting, slightly dry descriptions on the History Channel of like medieval battles that have where there was actually a stream that they were fighting over. And that kind of, like, the idea that you could play a game of Hobgoblin with little coloured bits of paper, and that it would look like one of those maps, and that would sort of be in and of itself quite fun. I think that's where that sort of like unit rank and flank loveliness sort of emerges from. And I think that I do need to take a really hard look by putting some models on the table and say, if I introduce individually based models, does that break the heart of Hobgoblin?
Yeah, I mean, it is an important question as to, I mean, it's one of it's one of the eternal questions I find is the whole sort of, why are we bothering with the miniatures? You know, why? I mean,
I
in all
just looking at the fact that like there's just like other side of the camera, there's just like unbroken wall of like miniatures in various states of painting. Like that's
oh
why.
no. I mean, no, look, I'm
Secondary.
I mean, look, you know, I'm moving house at the moment, and I've just got these
Right.
stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks of boxes of miniatures, and
Yeah,
I've
never
got
moving house again.
my bits box is 2 suitcases, literally.
I want to go to there.
I mean, you know, I've got a set of Bronzino's Galloper guns that I've never built because they were, you know, a fun thing at one point. My point is, like, you know, I've got a lot of miniatures. Don't get me wrong, but there is, as a games designer, there is a question of what really are the miniatures doing in my? Are they anything other than decoration of, and that's not nothing. That, you know, it's not nothing to have a battlefield that looks cool and badass, and, you know, look at my mightiest army, isn't it? Swish. It's not nothing to the experience and the gamification, and the, you know, the toyish nature of it and all these sorts of things. But that said, on a games design level, it is a kind of, okay, what are the miniatures doing in my game? Are they just decoration, or have they got some sort of hard, crunchy, you know, games purpose? And what is it, and how does it work? And is it, you know, because the thing about Warhammer is that the square bases had a hardcore game purpose. It told you how big your flank was, how
Hmm.
big your rear was, and it mattered. It really mattered how big your flank was, because it really mattered whether somebody could get 2 units into your flank or just 1. You know, and it had rules about, okay, if you 2 units charge your flank and you've got a hero on that side of that unit, you can cut their hero out from combat. And so it really mattered. Now, it didn't particularly matter that there were dudes stood on those bases, you know, by and large. Okay, the odd cannonball.
They just stopped you from being able to actually rank the bases up correctly.
Yeah. A lot, you know, yeah. Well, once in the blue moon, someone cannon sniped your general, so it really mattered at that moment what exactly your miniatures looked like when
Yeah, but
someone, oh yeah, I could get your general.
unsuccessful games design.
But by and large, the bases mattered a hell of a lot, but the miniatures were kind of like, you know. And some skirmish games, it's like, as we were saying before, Infinity has gone back and forth and around and again on trying to make miniatures this matter or not matter, or work or not
I
work.
mean,
And
you're not wrong, and I totally understand what you're saying. And at the same time, like I sort of have a quite violent reaction to it, which is that for me the it's so much more symbiotic. Like the reaction from the A Billion Suns audience, or even like the Perilous Tales audience, where it's like rules rules that permit me to use models but inspire me to use models. Oh, models, I can use models. How can I fit that in? Oh, I can fit them in like this. Oh, and then I can do this, inspires me to look at another model. And so like the symbiotic relationship between physical lovely object that I want to possess and paint, and then the fact that I want to put that on the table and do something with it, and having done something with it, I'm like, oh, that did the thing that I thought it was going to do, and now I want another one of those to be its mate. And so the first time that you sort of put some spaceships on the table and they do spaceship things, you're like, okay, now I need more spaceships, more spaceships. Like it's a very symbiotic relationship between like having the toys and the toys doing the thing that is exciting about the toy. Like it's very much like for me, if you took the miniatures away, it just doesn't, it's no longer playing with toys. And as a games designer, my approach to games design is, yes, I'm obviously obsessed with, you know, the craft and the, you know, ingenuity and the novelness, but at its heart it has to be a symbiotic relationship that is essentially me making brum brum noises whilst pushing a toy car around.
so the question here is, what is the toy in Hobgoblin? Is it a ranked up unit of 20 goblins with spears and a standard and a hero? And look at how many of them there are, how impressive they are. There's like 50 of them. Ooh, they must be terrifying. Or is it
and I don't know
a
the answer
miniature?
because I'll be honest, my Demons of Zinch army mounted on little round bases looks chef's kiss. It's so good. Whereas many of my older Warhammer armies, like, they never fitted on their stupid little bases anyway, and they're all elbowing each other for space, and they look kind of, I don't know. So I think that's exactly.
You should have made more scenic bases. Make a big diorama in the middle of the unit, which is just one massive base, and everyone's climbing on top of each other. And that's half the fun of building a Warhammer army, is making it in such a way that it only ranks up in one way, and then carefully numbering each of the bases. So, and then somebody says, "Oh, should I put them back on the movement tray for you?" And then the guy's like, "You can try, but I promise you can't, because no, he has to be third from the back, fourth in. Otherwise, his elbow sticks in that guy's throat, and it all gets into
exactly
the whole thing."
So I think that's a brilliant question, and that's a lovely generic question, I think, to probably lead this conversation on. So I need to go and figure out what's the toy car that I'm making brum brum noises about. And make sure that whatever my passion for that is gets poured into the rest of the system.
Yeah, because and I tell you, as I say, I'm not as driven by miniatures as you, but I have been playing, up until the world stopped everybody from leaving their bathrooms. I have been playing Warhammer the whole time, and there remains something immensely satisfying about dropping a unit of 30 metal ghouls onto the table in a massive ranked up thing. Right, okay, check this. I find that I probably find that more satisfying than putting a monster on the table. I'm not a massive fan of monster miniatures. It's like, oh, he's big, woo, whereas I think there's something really satisfying about a big old ranked up unit, especially one where you've got sort of, a zombie pyramid of clowns in the third rank. I think it's not nothing having a ranked up unit, and I miss ranked up units in a lot of games, and I miss being able to.
Hobgoblin.
Well, if Hobgoblins is going to be a ranked up unit game, then maybe but yes. Anyway, yes, you need to go away and have a little ponder and figure out what the 14-year-old boy in you wants from Hobgoblin.
Whilst we've been talking, I've been wondering about whether it is possible to solve. So what if you have circular bases and you essentially say there's two bases that have to be like 20 centimeters apart or thinner, and then you have to, like, if you have to describe the outside U shape of a unit, and then whoever can be in whatever cloud inside that, but you have to have like 4 outside markers, and no one can be outside of that frame. That might actually work. I'd need to give it a little bit of thinking on whether it would work without angles, but
I mean again, yeah, I think you totally can do that, but you would end up sticking them on a bit of cardboard, and unless you're literally like, okay, they have to have a combined trigonometry of.
Yeah, no, what this says is here's how you describe the shape of any set of miniatures. You can put them on a movement tray, you can put them on a piece of cardboard, or if you like the look of free-ranging circular bases, this still absolutely functions this way, and there's not a lot of trigonometry in it.
I mean, there was that game jam where I stuck in that one-page rules thing of where you had to have each of your guys under the corners of an A4 piece of paper, and then they powered up additionally. So you could give people a set of templates to go, okay, one of the corners of each of these templates has got to be on one of the heads of one of your guys, otherwise they don't count as a unit. Anyway, I think you have pondering to do, young
right,
Mr. Hutchinson.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Yes, yeah. I hope that some part of that sort of live rambling was of interest to people. Is Hobgoblin still available in the world?
So if you are curious about what I'm talking about, you can go to planetsmasher.games, and I think you can still download the 2015 beta rules. So that's version 1.2 or something. So I am in the middle of having a little think about what version 2 might look like. But there's a perfectly playable and entirely free rank and flank game available at planetsmashergames.com.
I will find that link and put it in the in the comments section below this video, presumably at some point. I mean, where have you found this? There will be a comment section, so please let us know what you think. Look up Hobgoblin, have a go of it. Tell Mike what you think of Hobgoblin
after subscribing to our channel and liking this video.
Yes, and say be
And
nice. Mike likes to hear nice things. Tell us what you'd like us to talk about.
Honest appraisals of my performance, please. Clear, constructive feedback.
That's a very obvious lie. If you are watching this video, it's available as a podcast for long painting sessions. If you're on the podcast, check out our faces on YouTube. Reach out to us on Twitter or any other social media. But until next time, it's going to be goodbye for now. Bye.
Bye.